Robert writes, "I have just returned from the northern woods, and I bring alarming news. Something there is turning the leaves to red and gold, and it's coming this way." Already here one can see the signs, an unfamiliar coolness in the air, sailboats being brought in. Just this morning, a school bus went by. Take warning, friends. Every leaf in our fair town is doomed, and every green, unfinished summer dream will now be foreclosed. We have had our fleeting summer. A colleague told me he had read in a magazine that people who are generous with their money are happier, suffer fewer headaches, and have better sex lives. Here it is, I thought, the keys to the kingdom for the 1990s. Tithe and be saved, on earth at least. I spent about an hour and a half going through old magazines until I found the article, and alas, the information was inaccurate. The article reports that people who enjoy spending money are happier, suffer fewer headaches, and have better sex lives. So here we are, back to the old arguments for giving to the church. The rewards we get from giving may be less tangible than those we get from spending, but they are no less real. But then, who knows? Maybe generosity has the same effect as extravagance. Maybe your generous pledge to the church will help you with those headaches. In the newspaper, there was a story about a seminary professor in Kansas City who was put on trial by the Southern Baptists accused of being a Universalist. It's no wonder they were suspicious. He had stated publicly his beliefs that all people born into the world are children of God. And as if that were not enough, he also supported the ordination of women. The professor denied the charges. "I am not a Universalist," he said, and somehow he convinced them, and after 4 hours of deliberation they voted 21 to 11 to let him keep his job at the school. Now, I confess to being a Universalist. In fact, I'm a Unitarian Universalist. But I wonder, if I were arrested and charged with being one, would there be enough evidence to convict me? The Kansas City story proves that having the right beliefs is not enough. The professor believed that all people are brothers and sisters, that every person has a piece of the divine spark, that women are the equals of men in the sight of God. But even that was not enough to bring a guilty verdict. No, if they are going to pin Unitarian Universalism on me, they will have to be able to show that I participated in and supported a Unitarian Universalist church. That's the only way to be sure. Beliefs, no matter how noble, must be embodied in a living institution, or they will have no convicting power. On a summer day, I hiked with my 15-year-old son through the Maine wilderness toward the north basin of Mount Katahdin. We had found time for the outing in the brief interval between my summer job as a chaplain and the beginning of my second year at Harvard Divinity School. The August sun beat down out of a clear sky. We took a short side trail and came upon a large pond. The still water was like blue tinted crystal. Around the perimeter of the pond were bare white stones. Beyond the stones were dense dark green trees. The sky was a deep blue. In the distance we could see the sheer rocks of the north face of Katahdin. With our backs to the mouth of the trail, we could see no evidence that human race had ever inhabited this planet. And then two hikers approached. They were young men, tan, muscular, bearded and sweaty. They were carrying backpacks, and I guess they had been on the trail for several days. The first hiker fixed his gaze on the pond, and with smooth motions he laid down his pack, slipped off his boots and socks, and peeled off his t-shirt as he walked toward the water. I knew exactly what he was about to do. He reached for his belt buckle, then turned toward my son and me and spoke for the first time. He said, "I hope you're not offended by nudity." I shrugged and said, "It doesn't bother me." As he pulled off his pants, he said, "Well, you never know when there might be a preacher in the crowd."
It's always a pleasure to have Joe come. For those of you who are not familiar with him, he is a former Methodist minister, has been in the newspaper or had been in the newspaper publishing business for quite some time. And now, Joe, I will turn it over to you.
As I've told some of you before, I've been coming up here to speak off and on for the last 20 years, since this church was founded in 1988. It's always a great and meaningful experience. I lived next door to a church for many years, as a child and as an adult. My brothers and I were always very aware of what was going on, and I'm sure that my father wasn't always appreciative of our surprise intrusion into some of his duties, such as suddenly finding us sitting in the pews with dirty faces and clothes as he married a couple who had just dropped by. And we had a thing about funerals. And when we were small, we especially wondered what goes on at a funeral. We had heard somehow at the funeral the soul of the departed was released and set free from the body. Who starts these rumors, I don't know, but children pick up on it and are fascinated with it. Once there was a member of one of my father's churches who had died, and we were standing on our tiptoes in the front of the breakfast room window watching the church door and waiting for the recessional to come out. As I remember, the deceased's name was a Mr. Majors. And I remember we waited a long time. And finally, there came the recessional. The casket carried by pallbearers, the family and members of the congregation. And mixed in amongst this crowd was an assistant funeral director carrying one of those velvet draped casters. Whereupon Dan, my middle brother, about 8 years old, exclaimed, "Look, here comes the casket. And there's a man carrying Mr. Major's soul in a sack." It's really fun growing up in a parsonage. I want to talk about soul, heart, and spirit. These three words are pregnant with all sorts of poetic and symbolic meaning. And the word soul is certainly not least among them. Of course, in many ancient traditions and the more conservative Christian groups, the human being is believed to have a dual nature, a body and a soul. And many have believed and still do that the soul, the essence of the personality, the being, can somehow survive death. The soul is the carrier, so to speak, of the spiritual existence. It is the eternal soul that fundamentalist groups claim they are saving for eternal life in heaven, or on the other hand, losing for an eternal existence in hell. And of course, it was this damnable philosophy that gave rise to the other half of our tradition, universalism. For others of us, however, including many of us, the term soul, if we use it at all, has other dimensions. We use it as an expression of feeling and emotion. Certainly the word has assumed new meaning for many, and in many realms of life, music being one of those. We speak of soul mates, soul brothers, soul sisters, kindred spirits. We speak of being soulful. I remember one of our daughters came in one night from a date and claimed to us that she had just experienced her first soul kiss, whereupon she was exhaustively interrogated to see if she knew what she was talking about. Her mother asked her how she knew it was a soul kiss. And she responded, "My boyfriend told me that's what it was." And this didn't help matters much. And we sought no further details. About 1970, there was a popular song called "Jesus is a Soul Man." I liked the song. It was a relief to have it on the air. But many of the parents in the church I was serving at that time were very upset that their children were listening to this song daily on the radio and understanding it on its terms. The human spirit, or soul, is or can be a very real facet of existence, the center of powerful meaning and emotion. But it is part of a unit, the human unit, part of the experience of having life and its varied senses and feelings. I wouldn't dare propose to an individual Unitarian Universalist an objective definition of soul. However, for myself, soul is one of the subjective and poetic ways of dealing with the mystery of my existence. And what we've done with the word heart. Our poetry would be practically decimated without expressions of what is felt in the heart. We've all grown up in a culture whose legends and folkways and poems consider the heart to be the center of emotion. We speak of situations where we let our heart guide us. We might say, I did thus and so because I listened to my heart, or I felt it in my heart. On the other hand, I've heard people say they used their heart and not their head and were later sorry. How many times have you heard someone say, oh, come on, have a heart? I remember an old love ballad from the late 40s entitled, My Heart Tells Me Everything. I can hear it now coming from the jukebox in the student union at Duke, with all the students dancing and listening to their hearts. A dangerous business sometimes. Some ancient cultures believed other body parts were the seats of emotion. The kidneys, for example. Personally, I prefer the heart. The heart, in most cases, seems to hold up better. But we moderns have all of this figured out. We know that the heart and all other parts of the body are flesh, anatomy. We know that what we feel and think is the result of what we have learned from childhood and have stored it in the central nervous system. So what is this about the heart? Well, the heart of the matter is this. The human spirit, if you will, needs a medium for emotional expression. The psyche is so complex and the potential so great for thought and accomplishment that the mere physical is transcended. We do not fully understand ourselves. And so we have built into our culture ways of feeling and expressing life. With all our scientific knowledge, coupled with all the horrible realities of history, we realize we have indeed evolved physically, mentally, and materially. And yet we still deal with matters of the heart. Perhaps future evolution, if you will, is at this point. Perhaps our very survival is a matter of the heart and nerve and courage and wisdom. No matter how sophisticated we get, we will always be trying to deal with the mystery. On the way up here, I kept thinking about this, and I suddenly realized that this thing about the heart and the symbolism I'm using was incomplete. And suddenly it dawned on me. Hearts can be broken. They can be broken by other people. They can be broken by events. And there's enough events going on today to break all of our hearts. We can also break our own heart by remembering where we have goofed up somewhere along the way, something undone. We can break our own hearts. And we also speak of the human spirit. When we speak of spirit, we mean something a bit different or more than when we talk about soul. Many ancients spoke of spirits in terms of out-of-body existence. They believed in spirit worlds. Ghosts and spirits held very real answers to the mystery of life. Biblical New Testament scholars are sure that Jesus of Nazareth believed in spirits and demons. It was part of that culture. The miraculous also has been used to explain phenomena. Miracles have taken over, so to speak, when all else failed to explain things. It's no mystery, therefore, that the miraculous forms a major portion of biblical literature and the literature of many other religions. The literature comes out of the lives of people living in a pre-scientific age. Mysteries were explained by the use of stories and legends employing the miraculous. And I would suggest even today there are some happenings which contain elements of what we are forced to call miraculous, for the lack of a better expression. This is simply because we do not know everything. Therefore, words such as accident or coincidence or chance don't always suffice. There's a priceless story which has been attributed to Mark Twain through the years. It's certainly typical of Mark Twain. A group of ministers were visiting the Holy Land and wanted one of their adventures to be a boat ride on the Sea of Galilee. And upon approaching the guides about arrangements for this trip, they learned they would be charged $8 a head, which outraged this group of holy men. They returned to the hotel dining room, which also included a bar, complaining about the sacrilege of such commercialism. Whereupon a wag sitting over on a bar stool nearby said, "Now you know why Jesus walked across." Traditionally, the spiritual, or being spiritual, has had either otherworldly connotations or exhibited rather bizarre behavior. I remember Methodist pastor parish committee members always wanted to know if their new minister was spiritual, whatever that meant. What they meant by that question ranged all the way from being charismatic or how good he was at public praying or how many converts he could win by preaching salvation. But what I have always resented is having perfectly good and useful terminology and expression taken from me because it had been polluted with only one interpretation. I have learned that many of us have a conception of what otherwise might be called spiritual, but the word is so culturally loaded, we hesitate to use it, and we hesitate to talk even about spirituality. Therefore, one thing I believe modern Unitarian Universalists must learn to do is refuse to be robbed in reverse, so to speak, by other traditions. Many customs, expressions, and words aren't necessarily the property of orthodoxy. That is, we must not throw the baby out with the bathwater in an effort to avoid something we associate with another group in a negative way. We UUs come from all sorts of religious backgrounds. I've been surprised through the years at Holston Valley about how many of our new members have come to us from no religious background whatever. Some of them now form the leadership of that congregation. They finally found something. We come from Protestantism, Roman Catholicism, Judaism, Hindu, Buddhist, deist, theist, agnostic, atheist, scientific realists, mystics, and pagans. What a gang. We all have our own concepts, but I still believe that many things can be spiritual. On the way up here, I was also thinking about your watershed event of being 12 years under this green roof and 20 years of existence. And I thought this could be called 2012 Day. The congregation was formed 20 years ago, and you've been under this green roof for 12 years, after living out of boxes for 8 years. I remember those boxes. I remember some of the transformation we made in some of those locations. I think of the work many people have done to make this place what it is and what it is to be. But one thing we all know, but here we are in 2008, existing and growing and meeting needs. And we are doing it these days in a national and worldwide religious atmosphere that is threatening and frightening. And so it is imperative that the light from our chalice invades some of that darkness. And we do it by making good on the words of our fellowship invocations, our covenants, our mission statements. They must be words that live.